you and the development team have done so much work in providing us with a rich body of work to pull from, allows us to impose that value system through the lens of MMT and perhaps save society from itself as we go through what looks to be a tremendously violent crisis, a climate crisis that I don't believe anybody that has done any reading on the subject would deny is happening before our very eyes. Phil, I know that you are an MMT economist, but you have a value system as well, and you've written about these things extensively. When you impose your value system on this, the idea of taking the global south and shifting that production to them to allow them to survive and to catch up while taking away some of the excesses of the global north, I don't see how that's a tremendously wrong position to take.
Well, I think in what you just said, you mentioned the word profit. I've always been on the left, and during the 1970s, in that era, the early 70s, when I was sort of coming of age, if you like, the big debates were American imperialism. The Vietnam War was featured heavily in that, colonialism, the ravaging of third world countries. Even that word third world is a loaded term. And the groups that I was moving in as a student and after, we would say, yeah, we're socialists and we've got to overthrow capitalism. And we were extremely active in that endeavour, but I don't think we fully understood at that time. We were too young. Young people are great and innovative, but they haven't learnt all that much. Their enthusiasm is great, but they need time to understand things. The point that we're now at, I think, is that the ecological system is going to precipitate the system change that we couldn't as student radicals in the 1970s. In that era, even back into the 60s with the French riots and the Kent State in the US and all of the student unrest all around the world, as my generation came to understand that capitalism was letting us down, that protest movement, we made gains, of course. There was massive change in the way we understood the role of women and race and things like that. But in general, our aim was to overthrow capitalism, and we failed. It was a more powerful entity than we were. But when I think of degrowth, and you analyse the technical aspects of it, what does it mean? It means less energy use, blah, all the rest of the stuff, and we can articulate that if you like. But the ultimate conclusion, and I'm in the process of researching and putting notes together for a book on this topic, because when you come down to it after working on the idea and understanding it, reading all the literature and sussing out your own feelings about it, ultimately the question I come down to is, well, what's the problem? And the problem is that our entire system of allocation of economic resources and economic activity is really motivated by capitalist profit. That's the motivation. We make all these decisions based upon private profit. And that's incredibly powerful as an enemy. And I'm not saying it's a great thing. I think it's a terrible thing. And the only way I think we're going to be able to jump the hurdle and move to a progressive, degrowth, sustainable future is by abandoning the profit motive. Now, then you ask me, is that going to happen? And that's where I get very gloomy. And I go back to my student days, and we tried to do it then. And it resonates with what you just said about a violent change. And I'm still sketching this out in my mind, but I think that the degrowth agenda is not going to come about with greenies entering politics and mildly restraining some things in a regulative framework or something. I think that we're approaching a point where there's so many fault lines in our society interacting with the fault lines in the ecology. And there's so many powerful vested forces that are resisting all of those fault lines for their own profit, that we're into a very grim future. That's my current position, a violent future.